So, this is an unplanned reaction. 7 worst cartridges for when the fit hits the Shan. I don't have any understanding or context for this, so I hope this is good. I am just personally curious.
We all have a cartridge for when things go sideways at home, but if things were to go really sideways, enough to where you had to pick up and leave, the last possible thing you would want is a cartridge that doesn't make sense. That's why I came up with a list of 7 of the worst possible thing you would want is a cartridge that doesn't make sense.
This cartridge is called the Ear Splittin' Loudon Boomer. It is a real cartridge, and that is its real name. Just take that in for a second. The Ear Splittin' Loudon Boomer is a real cartridge, it's a real name, and it is a either 22 or 17 fired out of a 50 BMG shell. This thing moves at like Mach 12. For an emergency survival situation, my personal recommendations are collectively, well, in order of importance, let's put it that way. 22 long rifle, because it is common, you can carry an enormous amount of it, and as long as you can aim, it can bring down a lot of game for hunting, and it's still a bullet, it's still defensive. 9mm, again, because it's extremely common, and 5.56 for the same reason. All 3 of these are extremely common. There's an enormous library of firearms that can use them. Parts for most of those firearms are easy to get. And of course, just because so many people own firearms in those calibers, if something happens in a survival situation, you can probably find just a flat-out replacement if necessary. Those would be the 3 bullet calibers, with 12 gauge then probably being the shotgun. But, while 12 gauge is fairly common, I would not recommend it a whole lot. I would pick the rifle ones first, because while 12 gauge is great for defense and short range hunting, ultimately the actual bullet type projectiles are going to be more useful, unless it's something super specific like this or 5.7 handgun that are not going to be easily acquirable.
That's why I came up with a list of 7 of the worst possible choices you could take with you if you had to be mobile during it hit the fan. Keep in mind that there are much worse cartridge options out there, but these are the ones that I think a large amount of people might actually take. Starting with our number 7 spot, the 12 gauge, ruffling some feathers early. Sure, someone always has a 12 gauge in every post-apocalyptic or zombie-themed media out there, but does that mean it's a good option if you had to pick up and leave? No, but it does have some pretty enticing benefits. I mean, for one, everybody has a 12 gauge. I mean, literally everybody has a 12 gauge, which means that trading or finding ammo should be pretty easy, which cannot be said about any of the other cartridges on this list. 2, you're not finding anything more versatile than the 12 gauge. But just because I said versatile does not mean that it's good for every scenario. I mean, how far are you going to reliably hit with a 12 gauge? If you're using a slug, maybe 125 or...
What did I just say? What did I just say?
150 yards if you're lucky, slightly more if you're using a Sabo slug, but if range is at the top of your list, the 12 gauge is definitely not the cartridge for you. And I know you might be saying, well, I don't need range, and you know, that might be...
In a survival situation, you need range. And also, I mean, we've already gotten into it, but I've just feel like I gotta say it anyways. 12 gauge is the only shotgun if you're taking shotgun. There really isn't a point in focusing any other shotgun at all. The only reason why you might take something like 410 is if you have a 45 long Colt that can fire it, and I would not recommend that. It's very nice, it's very useful, it's not very common.
true. I don't know what your scenario is, but that's not the number one reason why I think the 12 gauge is a terrible option if you had to pick up and leave. The main reason is bulk. I mean, have you seen how much room a 100-round box takes up? You're talking about the same amount of weight as about 375 rounds of 9mm, taking up over double the space. That, keep in mind,
What did
you
I say
don't
about
have
22?
because you just picked up and left. Just to reiterate that point, that is about a quarter of the amount of ammo taking up double the space. It just doesn't make any sense. There's just a lot of wasted room inside a 12 gauge with the wad and everything, and there's just no getting around it unless you go to mini shells. But at that point, you're talking over twice the cost, less payload, and they don't reliably feed and everything. Now, if we're talking about a bird apocalypse, if that was a scenario, then the 12 gauge becomes the best option on the list. But what are the chances of that happening? Probably none. Still, the 12 gauge is far from the worst option on this list if you did have to pick up and leave. And slightly worse off at number 6 on our list, we have the 338 ARC. No, I'm just kidding.
I swear, for a second I was thinking he's gonna say 45 long cold, isn't he?
Any niche AR off at number 6 on our list, we have the 338 ARC. No, I'm just kidding. Any niche AR cartridge. Which, thanks to Optics Planet for helping me out with this one. And don't forget the banana saves 7%, and it really helps out the channel. Anyway, what does niche entail? Basically, any cartridge oriented around the AR that's not 5.56, 223, 300 blackout, or 7.62 by 39, which, let's face it, that one's really not a good AR cartridge. And you might be able to make a case for the 6.5 Grendel, but that's a bit of a stretch. No, it's not because they take up more room, because they don't, usually. No, it's not because they weigh more, because they don't, usually. I mean, you can't even argue that.
Keep pulling out the Beowulf. Which is a cool sounding round, but has many, many issues.
Most don't offer either at least better power, penetration, ballistics, or a combination of all those three over basic AR cartridges. No, what this one comes down to is ammo accessibility, because let's face it, when you inevitably run out of the ammo that you could carry on your person, the chances of you finding any niche AR cartridge, especially the exact one that you're carrying, are slim to none. I mean, sure, you might get lucky and run up on a stash of 458 SOCOM or 6mm ARC, but is that really a chance you're willing to take? Because I'm not. Still, there are much worse options out there, like our number 5 spot, the 545 by 39. If it ever actually does hit the fan, the AK is going to be a very popular choice, for good reason. Even though I'm not necessarily the biggest AK fan, I get it. But what are most of those AKs going to be chambered in? Not the 545 by 39, that's for dang sure. Now, I did test the 545 a long while ago, and although it does offer somewhat similar ballistics to the 556, not quite as good penetration.
That's what my wife says about me compared to her boyfriend.
I didn't need to know that anyway. What I was trying to say is that 545 ammo is few and far between. Like, it's hard to find right now when society is working somewhat okay, debatably somewhat okay. So how could you...
It is easier for me to get niche 25 ACP and 32 ACP rounds than 545 for comparison. And like, no one uses those anymore. At least not in the US.
You possibly expect to find any 545 ammo when it's not working at all? I mean, sure, you might get lucky and run into a can of 7.6 ammo, but if we're being completely honest, 7.6 ammo sucks almost as bad as it would be to carry around our number 4 spot, the 338 Lapua!
Here we go.
People have 10 different ways to pronounce this. Anyway, this one does have a couple of pros. The first one being the insane amount of range you get. Like, insane amount of range. Now, whether or not you know how to use it, or whether or not you actually need it, who knows? But the second thing you get, especially over any of the cartridges that we've talked about so far, is a major upgrade in penetration. Something the missus tells me I could use, which who knows what she means by that.
I think she means your dick.
Other than that, really not a whole lot of benefits, especially when you see how much freaking room this thing takes up. But I mean, if we're being completely honest, it really doesn't take up a whole lot more room than other common magnums that you might take, like the 300 Win Mag. So that's not its biggest downside. Its biggest downside has to be that most people who buy a 338 Lapua buy it for the novelty of saying they have a 338 Lapua.
So
that means that finding ammo for this thing is going to be slim to none. I mean, I would even venture to say that most people who buy these things don't have more than a few boxes of ammo stocked up. Could be wrong on that, but I don't think I am. On top of this, you're talking about a significant amount of recoil.
Could be wrong, but I'm not wrong. He is... Yeah, that's the issue, and that's why 22.9 and 5.56 are my recommendations, because they're everywhere. Anything high power is going to be a little bit questionable, except in very specific scenarios, purely on the basis of he's shooting through steel plates. I mean, look, a bear is a problem but it's probably not going to be covered in steel plates. Your AR with a 30 round magazine may take half the magazine to bring down the bear if you don't get good shot placement, but it will still bring down the bear.
Especially if you're not using a muzzle brake, which most of them are equipped with a muzzle brake, but if you are using one, then you're talking about giving your location away to everybody within 2 miles. I mean, these are insanely loud, just like our number 3 spot. But how's about our honorable mentions real quick?
If the bear is covered in steel, you might have bigger issues that want to go yeah. If the bear is covered in steel, why did you leave your house? Is basically the answer.
Any elephant cartridge. No, just kidding. Nobody's taking an elephant cartridge unless you live next to Scott.
Unless you yeah. Yeah. Of course.
Then it might make sense. No, our real honorable mentions are the 5.7 by 28 and the 30.
What'd I say? 5.7. I said 5.7. Don't take 5.7. What did I say? Can I call it or what?
Then it might make sense. No, our real honorable mentions are the 5.7 by 28 and the 30 carbine. And guys, let me tell you, this was a tough one. Because with how lightweight and compact these things are, you can carry a metric shite-load of these rounds. But that also doesn't mean that I think they're great options either. Because while the 5.7 in recent years has been getting a lot of budget options to make it a more popular cartridge, it's still really not there yet. And the 30 carbine, there's no excuses here. It has been out for a very long time, and it's just not the most popular cartridge out there. And with current ammo prices above the 5.56, nobody's really hoarding this stuff, if you know what I mean. Having said that though, if you are able to stock up on these rounds, enough to where you could carry, you know, a crap ton of them, then you might not need to find ammo, in which case they would make sense. Wait, what was that? This better be good. Let's see. Oh, speaking of stocking up, look at what Ammo Squared sent. 30 carbine and 5.7 by 28.
How convenient.
Okay, fine. I did have them send some of my stockpile for this video. Anyway, Ammo Squared is a service that I recently found out about, and what I like about them is that I can set a certain budget every week, or whatever time interval I want, to stock up on the rounds that I want the most. After a pretty quick amount of time, I have a decent stockpile built up, at which point I can tell them to send however many of the rounds I want, or Ammo Squared will even keep it in their climate-controlled facility, which is sometimes the best option because I'll admit I don't always have room. So even though I don't think the 5.7 by 28 or the 30 carbine are the best choices if it does actually hit the fan, Ammo Squared allows me to keep stocked up without really even noticing it. One cartridge I will always notice stocking up on though is number 3 on our list. The 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum. Not only is this one of the loudest guns you will ever fire, sure to give away your location, but it almost doesn't have any freaking pros other than being extremely powerful for a handgun. But with how much these things freaking weigh, it's hard to call them a handgun. I mean, talk about big iron on your hip. You might as well be carrying around a small rifle at that point. But what's even worse than how big these are is how big these are, with the average load coming in at a 400 grain bullet going all the way up to 700 grains. You're not carrying many of these, which might be fine if ammo was accessible. But just like the 338 Lapua, the 500 Smith & Wesson suffers. For most people who buy these things, I mean, I would venture to say even more than the 338 Lapua, buy them for the novelty of saying they actually have one. And I mean, if we're being honest, you are one of the coolest guys at the range with one of these until you fire it and then you piss everybody off. But that's beside the point. When it actually hits the fan, there's no more range trips, and the couple boxes of ammo you might be able to find really aren't going to do you any good, especially with the limited weight to range ratio of this cartridge. And I was about to include the 460 Smith & Wesson.
I know multiple people who have bought handguns like that, who have fired them once to say they did and have never touched them again. They are miserable to shoot unless you're someone like Scott whose career revolves around showing them off. There's no point to those unless there's like a demonic invasion or something.
Especially with the limited weight to range ratio of this cartridge. And I was about to include the 460 Smith & Wesson in this category here, but then I remembered it does have quite a bit longer range than the 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum. Plus you also get the added benefit of shooting 454 Casull and 45 Colt out of it as well, which I'm not saying that either of those cartridges are extremely common, but at least that gives you the chance of finding 3 different rounds instead of 1. Now if we were facing a bear apocalypse, then the 500 Smith & Wesson would jump up to the number 1 spot on my list, at least for handguns. And speaking of handguns, handguns, how's about our number 2 spot? The 50 AE. Just like the 500 Smith & Wesson, this absolute beast of a handgun shoots 50 caliber bullets exactly a ½ inch in diameter. And although extra girth does feel good in the hand, it doesn't always equal the most pleasurable penetration, especially at 50 AE velocities, although we're still talking about 300 grain bullets, so it does offer pretty freaking good performance for a semi-auto handgun. What isn't good for a semi-auto handgun is the weight. Look at this monstrosity here. Just like the 500 Smith &
With
Wesson,
almost no
it is
ammo.
hard to call this thing a freaking handgun. You're basically talking about lightweight rifle territory. You're either going to need one hell of a belt to support this thing, or your pants are just going to be falling down the whole time.
I'm used to my pants around my ankles.
But even worse than that, even more so than any other cartridge on this list, the 50 AE, specifically the Desert Eagle, is bought as a novelty gun. Whether it's movies, TV shows, or video games, the Desert Eagle is probably the most iconic handgun of all time, which means that everybody wants one. What not everybody wants is to stock up on 50 AE ammo, and let me tell you, this is some high dollar stuff. I would even venture to say you could probably find a Desert Eagle to trade for before finding 50 AE ammo in this scenario. I mean, I could be wrong on that, but if for some insane reason you're dead set on carrying a full-size Desert Eagle, you're done. But the only one that makes sense, at least in my mind, is the 44 Magnum, and even then, you're talking about a considerable amount of weight, but still not even close to the amount of weight of our number 1 spot, the 50 BMG, with the average rifle setup coming in the amount of weight of our number 1 spot, the 50 BMG.
Didn't realize that was a 12 by 7 by 108, which is the Russian equivalent of 50 BMG.
With the average rifle setup coming in at 30 pounds plus. I would say that nobody's dumb enough to take one of these if they had to pick up and leave, but I also know that there's a certain percentage of people that you know deep down have wet dreams about taking out a Humvee or, you know, whatever at 1,000 yards. In this scenario, the good thing is with the absolutely insane amount of power and range you have at your disposal paired with the AP options on the market, you could probably do that if you want to, but is it a realistic scenario? Probably not, which that begs the question, do you really need a 50 BMG for 99.99% of any of the other scenarios that might come up? I'm gonna say no, so that leaves us with a 30-pound plus overkill monstrosity on our backs, which is only the beginning of our problems. If you think the 338 Lapua is loud, it is, but the 50 BMG says, hold both my beers. We don't care if everybody on this half of the continent knows where we're at. Maybe a bit of an over-exaggeration, but not much. Anyway, if you think the 12 gauge takes up a lot of room, the 50 BMG takes up more room than 2 12 gauge rounds, and it weighs almost 1.5 times as much, meaning that carrying any significant amount of ammo is not an option, so you're going to need to find it pretty quickly. Problem with the 50 BMG, maybe even as much as the 50 AE, is that people who buy these things typically only buy them to say that they have a 50 BMG. I mean, who doesn't want to say that they have a 50 BMG?
I don't.
Problem is, when the gun is primarily bought to sit in the safe, stocking up on ammo, especially with the cost that it is, isn't necessarily a priority for most people. So that means the 50 BMG that we've been carrying just turned into a 30-pound plus paperweight, and at that point, I guess the only thing you could really do is pull off the barrel and use it as a bat, if that's even an option. But I really hope you enjoyed my list. I'm sure it's a little bit different from yours, so make sure to talk about it in the comments section down below. Remember, don't let ballistics drive you bananas.
I
and
can't
make
believe
sure
I
to check
called
out
as
these
much of that
videos
as
here.
I did. I am quite pleased with myself for calling as much of that as I did. I'm pleased with myself. Yeah, so that was Banana Ballistics. So one moment while I get the link up for y'all.